aunt dragged me from my mom's hospital bedside, refused her treatment, and stole my inheritance. I humiliated her publicly and sent her to prison. Now she's contacting me, saying she misses her baby. My aunt forced me to leave home when I was 16. My mom was in a coma at the time. She was coming home to celebrate me getting all A's on my report card when a car swerved her off the road and into a ditch. I was still at her hospital bedside, begging her to wake up, when my aunt and uncle showed up, grabbing me by my arm and forcefully dragging me out. They got emergency guardianship of me immediately. What's worse is my Aunt Patricia hadn't spoken to my mom in 5 years. She kept saying things like, "This is a blessing in disguise," and "You'll have opportunities Sarah never could have given you." Within a week, she moved me 800 miles away to their sprawling mansion, with its manicured lawns and marble fountains that felt more like a museum than a home. The drive there was excruciating. 8 hours of staring out the window at unfamiliar landscapes, while Patricia chatted on the phone about her new responsibility, as if I were a package to be delivered. Every mile that passed took me further from my mom, and I could feel my heart physically aching with each passing road sign. Their house was enormous, with towering white columns and windows that gleamed in the sunlight. Inside, the floors were so polished I could see my reflection in them, and everything smelled of lemon furniture polish and expensive perfume. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous entryway as Patricia led me to my room, a space 3 times the size of my bedroom back home, but somehow feeling smaller and more confining. She enrolled me at Westlake Preparatory Academy, where everyone wore blazers with gold crests and spoke about summer homes in the Hamptons. On my first day, I stood frozen at the entrance, clutching my new leather backpack that still smelled of the store. Students brushed past me, their confident voices and easy laughter highlighting how much I didn't belong. The school hallways were lined with trophy cases and oil paintings of distinguished alumni, the floors gleaming with the same sterile perfection as Patricia's mansion. Patricia bought me a whole new wardrobe, replacing my comfortable jeans and hoodies with stiff designer clothes that made me feel like I was wearing someone else's skin. The shopping trips were torturous. Hours spent in high-end boutiques where salespeople fawned over Patricia, while eyeing me with barely concealed judgment. Each outfit cost more than my mom would spend on clothes for an entire year, the price tags making my stomach twist with guilt and discomfort. The fabrics itched against my skin, the collars too tight, the shoes pinching my toes, but Patricia insisted they were proper attire for a young lady of status. She paraded me around at her social gatherings, her hand gripping my shoulder too tightly as she told everyone how she rescued her poor niece from poverty. At these parties, crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across rooms filled with people whose jewelry probably cost more than my mom's car. The air was thick with expensive cologne and the cloying scent of flower arrangements that were replaced daily. Women with perfect hair and frozen smiles would pat my cheek and tell me how fortunate I was, their eyes never quite meeting mine as they quickly moved on to more interesting conversations. I went along with it at first because I was 16 and terrified, my world having collapsed overnight. Every morning I woke up disoriented, expecting to see my mom's face, only to remember with a crushing weight that she was lying unconscious in a hospital bed hundreds of miles away. The ceiling in my new room had ornate moldings that I would trace with my eyes in the early hours, trying to distract myself from the hollow feeling in my chest. I let her brag to her friends about how she saved me, about how without her I'd be homeless. I even let her drag my mother's name through the dirt in front of others, calling her irresponsible and ill-equipped for motherhood, while I stood there, my fingernails digging into my palms, because I was too exhausted to fight. Each insult about my mom felt like a physical blow, but I swallowed my defense, the words burning in my throat like acid. But then she started to treat my grief like it was some kind of character flaw, a defect that needed correcting. Whenever I tried to talk about missing my mom, the ache in my chest that never seemed to go away, she would cut me off with a dismissive wave. "You're being dramatic," she'd say, "or dwelling on the past won't help anyone." One night I was caught crying while looking at an old photo of my mom and me at the beach, our faces sunburned and happy, sand still clinging to our shoulders. Patricia snatched the photo from my hands, her manicured nails scratching my skin. "This isn't healthy," she declared, tucking the photo into her pocket. "You need to focus on your future, not wallow in memories." The loss of that photo felt like losing a piece of my mom all over again, and I cried silently into my pillow that night, muffling the sound with my hand so Patricia wouldn't hear. That cold dismissal of my pain was when I knew something had to change. So I did something for myself and started volunteering at the children's hospital through school. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and artificial cherry air freshener, but somehow felt more like home than Patricia's mansion ever did. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the linoleum floors squeaked under my shoes. But there was a warmth here that Patricia's marble halls lacked. Working with kids whose parents were sick reminded me of who I actually was and helped me bond with something real. These children with their brave smiles and scared eyes needed someone who understood, and I finally felt useful instead of like some trophy Patricia showed off at her country club luncheons. I would read stories to them, the colorful picture books a stark contrast to the sterile hospital environment. Sometimes I'd bring art supplies smuggled in my backpack, and we'd create messy masterpieces that would never be allowed on Patricia's immaculate refrigerator. There was one little girl, Maya, with leukemia, who loved when I braided her stuffed animal's yarn hair. Her tiny fingers would follow mine, learning the pattern, her face lighting up with accomplishment when she managed to complete a braid herself. The nurses would smile when they saw me coming, sometimes slipping me extra pudding cups for the kids, or whispering updates about their conditions so I could tailor my activities to their energy levels that day. That's when everything exploded. Patricia found out about my volunteering when she overheard me talking to a classmate about a little boy named Ethan who was fighting leukemia. I was describing how we'd made paper airplanes and sailed them down the hospital corridor, his weak throes still accompanied by peals of delighted laughter. The memory made me smile for the first time in weeks. She went absolutely insane, her face contorting with rage as she screamed at me about how it was morbid and unhealthy, and how I needed to let go of my stupid clinging to my mom. Her voice echoed through the vaulted ceilings of their home as she followed me up the grand staircase, her heels clicking like angry insects on the marble. The sound bounced off the walls, amplifying her fury until it seemed to fill every corner of the house. "You're embarrassing me!" she shrieked, her perfectly coiffed hair coming loose as she gesticulated wildly. People will think there's something wrong with you. Is that what you want? To make me look like I can't handle you properly? Spittle flew from her lips as she ranted, her face flushed with anger, veins standing out on her neck. But I refused to quit, so she threatened to pull me out of school entirely just so I couldn't volunteer. She kept yelling about everything I owed them for their generosity and how everything I have is because of them, her perfect makeup cracking as her true nature showed through. Her carefully constructed facade slipped, revealing the ugliness beneath the designer clothes and society smile. I realized then that she didn't see me as a person with feelings and needs. I was a possession she could control and make her own, a living doll to dress up and show off. The realization settled in my stomach like a stone, heavy and immovable. That night, I lay awake listening to the too quiet house, the absence of my mom's soft breathing in the next room like a physical presence. That's when I started digging through their house while they were at their endless social events. I waited until I heard the purr of their luxury car pulling out of the circular driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel fading into the distance. The house creaked and settled around me as I moved from room to room, opening drawers and checking behind paintings with trembling hands. I found a folder hidden in my uncle's office, tucked behind a false panel in his desk drawer, with legal documents that made me sick to my stomach. The office smelled of leather and expensive cigars, the heavy curtains blocking out most of the natural light. I had to use the flashlight on my phone to read the papers, the beam illuminating words that made my blood run cold. My mom had a substantial life insurance policy that Patricia was controlling as my guardian, nearly $750,000 that should have been securing my future and my mom's care. The policy details were printed on thick paper with official-looking seals, the numbers jumping out at me like accusations. I could almost feel the weight of all that money that wasn't being used to help my mom. But worse than that were the hospital bills, each one stamped with treatment declined in harsh red letters. The stamp was slightly crooked on some pages, as if applied hastily, the red ink a violent contrast to the sterile black and white text listing treatments that could have helped my mom. Patricia had been refusing expensive treatments for my mom's recovery, specialized neurological therapies and rehabilitation programs, claiming they were unnecessary expenses on forms she signed with a flourish. Treatments that could have helped her wake up. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the papers, my vision blurring with tears of rage and disbelief. I carefully photographed each document, the flash of my phone camera seeming unnaturally loud in the silent office. Every few seconds I would freeze, listening for the sound of returning footsteps or a car in the driveway, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. She was literally letting my mother suffer in a coma to save money while buying me designer clothes and bragging about what a hero she was. The hypocrisy was so staggering I felt physically ill, barely making it to the bathroom before emptying my stomach. The cold tile floor pressed against my knees as I knelt there, trying to process the betrayal. I used money I'd saved from tutoring younger students at school, which I'd started doing alongside my volunteer work, to secretly contact a lawyer. The tutoring sessions took place in the school library, surrounded by the comforting smell of old books and furniture polish. I would help 7th graders with algebra or science, their gratitude when they finally understood a concept providing a small bright spot in my otherwise grim existence. I saved every dollar they paid me, hiding the cash in a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice that Patricia would never think to open. Mr. Donovan met me at a coffee shop far from Patricia's social circle, his kind eyes crinkling with concern as I showed him copies of what I'd found. The coffee shop was noisy enough that our conversation wouldn't be overheard, the hiss of the espresso machine and clatter of dishes providing cover for our hushed discussion. My hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate I couldn't drink, my stomach too knotted with anxiety. I learned I could petition for emancipation, and that Patricia was legally required to continue my mom's treatment as long as funds were available. Mr. Donovan explained everything in a gentle voice, occasionally pausing to make sure I understood the legal terms. He took notes in a small leather-bound notebook, his handwriting neat and precise, occasionally nodding encouragingly when I provided details. I started documenting everything, keeping a detailed journal of Patricia's comments and actions, taking photos of the legal documents with shaking hands. My journal became my lifeline, hidden beneath my mattress during the day, and filled with entries late at night when the house was quiet. The pages quickly filled with dates, times, and exact quotes. The ink sometimes smudged from my tears, or from writing too quickly when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then came Patricia's big charity gala, the culmination of months of planning. For weeks, the house had been in chaos with party planners, florists, and caterers coming and going. Patricia spent hours on the phone discussing menu options and floral arrangements, completely oblivious to the evidence I was gathering against her. The local women's club was honoring her for taking in her orphaned niece with their Humanitarian of the Year award, and she was practically glowing with pride as she tried on different designer gowns in front of her full-length mirror. The night of the gala, the mansion was transformed. Fairy lights twinkled in the garden, and the marble entryway gleamed under the light of additional chandeliers brought in just for the occasion. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and roses, arranged in towering displays that cost more than a month's rent at our old apartment. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres that looked too perfect to eat. 100 of the city's most influential people were there, sipping champagne and nibbling on canapes while celebrating what an amazing person she was. Women in designer gowns air-kissed Patricia's cheeks, their diamonds catching the light as they moved. Men in expensive suits clapped my uncle on the back, congratulating him on his wife's humanitarian spirit. The hypocrisy was suffocating. During the speech portion, after the club president gushed about Patricia's selfless act of love, I walked up to the microphone. The stage was small but elevated, putting me slightly above the crowd. The spotlight felt hot on my face, and the microphone picked up the sound of my nervous breathing. Patricia looked confused but proud, her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes, probably thinking I was going to give some touching testimonial about her kindness. And I was. I'd like to thank my Aunt Patricia for everything she's done for me, I started, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. The crowd smiled approvingly, a sea of expectant faces waiting for the heartwarming story they'd come to hear. Thank you for moving me 800 miles away from my mother who's still fighting for her life in a coma. Thank you for refusing the medical treatments that could help her recover. Thank you for stealing my inheritance while telling everyone how generous you are. Patricia's smile started faltering, her face freezing in a grotesque mask as whispers rippled through the crowd. The soft murmur grew louder, like waves building before a storm. I could see people leaning toward each other, hands covering mouths as they whispered questions and exclamations of shock. "Thank you for forbidding me from calling the hospital because my grief over my dying mother was too dramatic for you," I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. The microphone amplified my accusations, ensuring that not a single person in the room could pretend they didn't hear. "Thank you for treating me like a trophy. Thank you for calling my mother irresponsible while she worked 2 jobs to support us, never missing a single one of my school events despite her exhaustion." I pulled out the legal documents and held them up, the papers trembling slightly in my grip. The spotlight caught the official letterhead and the harsh red, "Treatment declined" stamps, making them visible to everyone in the front rows. "These hospital bills show exactly which treatments you refused and how much money you've stolen from my mother's insurance policy while she fights for her life. The neurologist said these treatments could have helped her, but you decided designer handbags were more important." The silence in that room was deafening, like all the air had been sucked out at once. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished marble floor. Patricia's face went from horror to panic to devastation to rage and everything else in between, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the ugly truth emerging. 100 of her biggest social connections were staring at her in complete disgust. Some people had their hands over their mouths in shock. Others were already gathering their things to leave. Patricia tried to stammer out some explanation, her voice high and brittle, but people were already walking out, avoiding eye contact with her as if her disgrace might be contagious. "It's not what it looks like," she squeaked, her voice cracking with desperation. "She doesn't understand the medical situation." But her protest fell on deaf ears as the crowd continued to thin, the sound of car engines starting outside growing louder as guests fled the scene of her social execution. The best part was watching her try to explain herself as criminal investigators started looking into fraud charges in the following days. Her perfect reputation was destroyed in a single night, her phone suddenly silent where it had once buzzed constantly with invitations. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her, and the Women's Club publicly rescinded her award with a scathing statement about upholding the highest ethical standards. But the story doesn't end here, because last week I was visiting my mom, holding her limp hand and telling her about my day as I always did, when a nurse mentioned something that made my blood run cold. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whoosh of the ventilator helping my mom breathe. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, casting patterns on the linoleum floor as I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair that had become as familiar to me as my own bed. She said, "It's so weird that your aunt was here the night of the accident. She arrived about 20 minutes before the ambulance even got the call." The nurse's casual comment landed like a bomb in the peaceful room, the implications immediately clear despite her matter-of-fact tone. I froze, my hand gripping my mom's limp fingers so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The nurse kept organizing supplies, completely unaware of the bomb she'd just dropped. "What did you just say?" The nurse, Marcy according to her name tag, looked up from the medication cart she was restocking. "Oh, your aunt. She was here that night. I remember because she was so upset, pacing in the waiting room before they even brought your mom in." My mind raced, thoughts colliding like cars in a pileup. How could Patricia have been at the hospital before the ambulance? Before anyone even knew about the accident? It didn't make sense unless she already knew it was going to happen. The realization made my stomach lurch, bile rising in my throat as the pieces clicked into place. "Are you absolutely sure about the timing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart hammered against my ribs. I needed to be certain before I took this information to the police. There could be no room for doubt. Marcy nodded, her curly hair bouncing slightly. "Positive. I was starting my shift. She was already here at 8:40, but the ambulance didn't arrive until after 9. I remember checking the clock because I was supposed to be off at 9, but I stayed to help with the incoming trauma." She continued arranging supplies, unaware that her casual observation had just blown the case wide open. I thanked her and waited until she left the room before pulling out my phone with shaking hands. I called Detective Ramirez, who was handling the fraud investigation against Patricia. His deep voice sounded concerned as I explained what the nurse told me, my words tumbling out in a rush. After telling me to stay put, he arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later with another officer. They interviewed Marcy and checked the hospital security footage while I sat by my mom's bed, stroking her hair and whispering that I would find out the truth. The security office was small and cramped, filled with monitors showing different areas of the hospital. The footage from that night was grainy, but clear enough to see Patricia arriving at the time Marcy had mentioned, her designer coat and perfectly styled hair unmistakable even on the low-quality video. The timestamp confirmed it. Patricia arrived at 8:37 p.m., but the ambulance call wasn't logged until 8:58. The digital numbers in the corner of the screen provided irrefutable evidence of the timeline discrepancy. Detective Ramirez watched the footage several times, his expression growing grimmer with each viewing. "This changes everything," Detective Ramirez told me in the hallway outside my mom's room, his normally stoic face showing genuine concern. His voice was low, mindful of passing hospital staff and visitors. "We need to look into the accident itself now. This is no longer just about financial fraud." Over the next week, the investigation expanded dramatically. I stayed with my former school counselor, Mrs. Chen, who offered me a place after the gala incident. Her modest apartment with its smell of jasmine tea and walls lined with books felt more like home than Patricia's mansion ever had. The living room was small but cozy, with soft throw blankets and cushions that invited you to sink into them. Mrs. Chen made real home-cooked meals that we ate at an actual dining table, talking about our days like normal people instead of performing for an audience of social climbers. The police reviewed traffic cameras near the accident site and interviewed witnesses again, piecing together what really happened that night. Officers revisited the scene of the accident, taking new measurements and photographs in light of the suspicious timeline. The ditch where my mom's car had ended up was still scarred from the impact, broken glass glinting in the dirt even months later. The breakthrough came when they found a gas station security camera that had captured a black SUV matching my uncle's following my mom's car just before the accident. The footage wasn't clear enough to identify the driver, but it was enough for search warrants. The grainy video showed the SUV maintaining a consistent distance behind my mom's sedan, like a predator stalking its prey. When they searched my aunt and uncle's garage, they found damage to their SUV that had been hastily repaired, with fresh paint that didn't quite match the original color. Paint samples matched my mom's car, tiny flecks of evidence that told a horrifying story. The detectives photographed every inch of the vehicle, focusing on the front bumper where the new paint was slightly different in texture and sheen from the original. But the most damning evidence came from their phones. Detective Ramirez called me to the station to explain what they'd found, his office smelling of coffee and paper as he slid a document across the desk. The police station was busy, phones ringing and officers moving through the hallways with purpose. But his office provided a quiet space for this difficult conversation. "We recovered deleted text messages between your aunt and uncle from that night," he said, his expression grim. "The messages made me sick, each word like a punch to the stomach." 8:15 p.m. Patricia. "Is it done?" 8:17 p.m. Uncle. "Yes. Heading to hospital now as planned." 8:18 p.m. Patricia. "Perfect. I'll meet you there. Make sure no one sees you." There were more messages spanning months before the accident, discussing their plan in coded language that became clear in context. Patricia had been tracking my mom's schedule, knowing she'd be coming home that night to celebrate my grades. The messages revealed a calculated plot that had been in the works for weeks, with references to route planning and timing that left no doubt about their intentions. "But why?" I asked, my voice breaking as tears blurred my vision. Why would they do this to her? The question had been haunting me since I first suspected their involvement. What could possibly drive someone to such a horrific act against their own family? The detective sighed, rubbing his forehead. "We found journals in your aunt's private study. She's been obsessed with having a daughter for years. Apparently she can't have children of her own." He pushed a photocopy of a journal page toward me, Patricia's flowing handwriting filling the page with disturbing fantasies about saving me from my mother and creating the perfect mother-daughter relationship. It hit me then, like a wave of ice water, all those comments about me being her daughter now, and the blessing in disguise. Patricia hadn't just wanted to control my mom's money. She wanted me. She wanted a daughter to complete her perfect image, and my mom was in the way. The realization made me physically ill, and Detective Ramirez quickly pushed a trash can toward me as I gagged. Both Patricia and my uncle were arrested that day, led away in handcuffs as news cameras flashed. The charges expanded from fraud to attempted murder, their perfect reputation completely shattered as the story hit local news. Their wealthy friends who had once celebrated them now pretended they never knew them, crossing the street to avoid reporters asking for comments. With the fraud exposed, the court appointed a different guardian for me, my mom's college roommate Elaine, and released funds from my mom's insurance for her proper treatment. Elaine was everything Patricia wasn't. Warm, genuine, and respectful of my relationship with my mom. Her small house had mismatched furniture and family photos covering the refrigerator, the kitchen always smelling of something homemade and delicious. The doctors started her on the therapies Patricia had denied her, specialized neurological treatments that might help her regain consciousness. I watched as they administered the first treatments, hope blooming in my chest for the first time in months. The medical team explained each procedure carefully, using the funds that were finally available to give my mom the best possible chance at recovery. 3 months passed in a blur of hospital visits and legal proceedings. I moved back to our hometown, staying with Elaine while finishing school. I visited my mom every day, talking to her, reading to her, playing her favorite Beatles songs on my phone. The doctors said her brain activity was increasing, but they couldn't promise she'd wake up. Then one afternoon, as I sat doing homework by her bed, the steady rhythm of her breathing a comforting background noise, I felt her fingers twitch in mine. I looked up to see her eyelids fluttering, tiny movements that sent my heart racing. The pencil I'd been holding clattered to the floor as I leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. "Mom?" I whispered, hardly daring to hope after so many months of silence. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually finding my face. Recognition dawned in them, a spark of awareness that had been missing for so long. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. I burst into tears, clutching her hand as nurses rushed in, alerted by the change in her vital signs. The room suddenly filled with medical staff, their excited voices and hurried movements a blur around us, as I focused solely on my mom's face, her eyes finally open and aware. The doctors ran tests, checked her responses, and explained she'd need extensive rehabilitation. But the worst was over. She was back. Each day brought new progress. First words, then sentences, then being able to sit up with assistants. Physical therapists worked with her daily, helping her regain strength in muscles weakened by months of inactivity. As Patricia and my uncle awaited trial in jail, denied bail due to flight risk, my mom grew stronger each day. We talked about everything that happened, and she held me as I cried about the months I spent under Patricia's control. Sometimes she would cry too, devastated by what her sister had done and the time we had lost. "I'm so proud of you," she told me, her voice getting stronger with each passing day. "You saved both of us." Her hand would stroke my hair as she said this, the familiar gesture more precious now that I had almost lost it forever. The trial date was set for spring, and the prosecutor assured us the case was solid. Patricia and my uncle would face justice for what they did, their perfect facade permanently shattered. But more importantly, my mom was coming home. We were starting over, together, in our small apartment with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in photos of the two of us. It wasn't a mansion with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but it was filled with something Patricia's house never had, something her money couldn't buy, no matter how hard she tried, something real and true and ours.